Order. If I see those being raised again, either member that's raising them will be asked to leave. I've given a warning, and it's just being defied. I won't put up with it. Call on Government Order of the Day, number 1.
Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement Amendment Bill, first reading.
The Honourable Todd McLeay.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement Amendment Bill be now read a first time. And I nominate the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee to consider the bill. Mr Speaker, a report to be presented by the committee later this year will be a significant step for New Zealand in completing our domestic procedures necessary to ratify TPP. The amendments introduced by the bill will only take effect from the date that TPP enters into force for New Zealand. New Zealand, Mr Speaker, needs to trade with the rest of the world. We won't become more prosperous or richer simply selling to ourselves. Taking what we do best to the world, high-quality primary products, innovative solutions and technologies, and the world's best place to travel and study is what provides for our Kiwi standard of living. Improving access to international markets is part of the government's wider plan to create a stronger economy with more jobs and higher incomes for all New Zealanders. This government strongly believes that with an open, innovative economy, we can succeed in the global market. Mr Speaker, successive New Zealand governments have pursued free trade agreements to support New Zealand's global connections and maximise opportunities for exporters. TPP is the latest in this legacy. And I want to acknowledge the previous Labor government and the foresight of Helen Clark and Phil Goff for kick-starting negotiations that led to this very good agreement. I equally want to recognise the courage of David Shearer and Clayton Cosgrove for standing up for free trade. They appreciate that New Zealand's future lies in being an open, confident country on the world stage. TPP is our largest free trade agreement to date and places us centrally in a region encompassing nearly 40% of global GDP. TPP will deliver benefits to New Zealand and ultimately to all New Zealanders. The 12 TPP countries total 800 million people who already buy over 40% of New Zealand's exports. Mr Speaker, that's $20 billion in goods and $8 billion in services. TPP is New Zealand's first FTA with the US, with Japan, Canada, Mexico and Peru. And together these countries buy around $12 billion of New Zealand's goods and services annually. Tariffs will be eliminated on 95% of New Zealand's trade to these 5 countries once fully phased in. And in total, TPP will see savings of around $274 million a year on goods exports, around half of which will accrue immediately when the agreement comes into force. And this is around twice the savings initially forecast for the China FTA. With the exception of some dairy products to some markets and a reduced tariff rate on beef to Japan, where the rate falls from 38.5% to 9% for beef into Japan, the lowest ever agreed, all originating New Zealand exports to TPP countries will ultimately be duty-free. And TPP will also reduce non-tariff barriers to trade and ensure fair access for New Zealand firms doing business in these 11 other countries. The real strength of TPP, however, lies in the fact it is a regional set of rules greater than the sum of its parts. TPP will help New Zealand exporters build regional supply chains, trade across multiple markets under the same rules and build new partnerships. And ultimately, it's estimated that TPP will add an additional $2.7 billion at least a year to New Zealand's GDP by 2030. Now, Mr Speaker, some will say that this is an insignificant amount. Well, it's $2.7 billion worth of additional economic activity, securing jobs in all of our regions. Now, the reason for New Zealand becoming a party to TPP are both economic and strategic. It's important to note that as a founding member of TPP, New Zealand will gain an opportunity to exercise influence on the development of rules that the agreement will set for the region. And this is both in respect of its present form and, more significantly, in the future as membership may well increase. The Asia-Pacific region is the world's fastest growing and offers immense opportunity for New Zealand. Through agreements like TPP, we will be exceptionally well placed to take advantage of those opportunities and shape future trade liberalisation in our region. The counterfactual scenario, Mr Speaker, where New Zealand is left out of such an agreement, puts New Zealand at risk of marginalisation and decline in the region. And as a former Prime Minister said, it would be unthinkable that New Zealand would not sign up to TPP, a real visionary for the Labour Party of old. Over the past few months, I've been talking with New Zealanders in large numbers of events around the country, including TPP roadshows in Hui. And it's clear people understand that trade is critical to New Zealand's prosperity, but also there are some misinformation or conceptions out there. Now, TPP preserves our core interests, and it meets publicly stated bottom lines by those no longer pro-free trade. TPP does not change the fundamentals of the Pharmac model or the standard 20-year length of patents for medicines. Consumers will not pay more for their subsidised medicines as a result of TPP. TPP will not change the government's ability to make good law and regulations. ISDS exists in many New Zealand agreements, and the risk of an ISDS case being taken against the government, let alone being successful, is extremely low. Mr Speaker, in the TPP, the government has preserved the right for a future New Zealand government to restrict the purchase of residential land by non-resident foreigners. Flexibility remains to impose new discriminatory taxes on purchases of residential property by TPP investors. And this could be extremely helpful for a future government that wants to further restrict the 1% of foreigners who are buying homes in New Zealand. Mr Speaker, nothing in TPP will prevent the Crown from meeting its obligations to Māori. TPP includes a specific provision preserving the preeminence of the Treaty of Waitangi in New Zealand. The Waitangi Tribunal's report on the claims concerning TPP out last week found no breach of the Treaty of Waitangi. And TPP delivered meaningful gains in tariff reductions and market access, with total savings of $274 million a year in tariffs for New Zealand exporters and tariff elimination on 95.4% of New Zealand's exports to new markets, the US, Japan, Canada, Mexico and Peru. So, Mr Speaker, this is a good trade deal for New Zealand, negotiated by the very same people who negotiated the China Free Trade Agreement. All of those bottom lines have been met. So the question must be asked, and it must be answered, has the Labour Party really turned its back on trade? Or if, as I suspect, if they were higher in the polls, they would be voting in favour of TPP. Because, Mr Speaker, it's clear that if Helen Clark or Phil Goff or David Shearer were still the leader of the Labour Party, they would be supporting TPP. This bill is the latest step in New Zealand's domestic processes, with the TPP text and national interest analysis having just been examined by the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee. The committee utilised a substantially longer period for its examination than is specifically specified by Cabinet Manual, and received public submissions both in writing and from people in person. New Zealand, Mr Speaker, is already an open, transparent and trade-friendly country, so most of TPP's obligations are met by New Zealand's existing domestic legal and policy regime. However, a number of legislative and regulatory amendments are required to align New Zealand's domestic laws with certain obligations. And this bill is an omnibus bill which makes all of the domestic legislative changes required to comply with New Zealand's obligations in TPP. Except for obligations relating to plant variety rights, which New Zealand has a 3-year period following TPP's entry into force to consider and then implement. It's necessary for New Zealand to pass the bill before it's able to ratify a TPP. The key amendments contained in the bill enable the application of preferential tariff rates for imports originating from TPP countries, increasing New Zealand's overseas investment screening thresholds for significant business assets from $100 to $200 million for certain non-government investors, and implementation of the TPP intellectual property obligations. And this follows a consultation carried out in March by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment on proposed implementation of certain intellectual property changes to New Zealand law to require TPP. The TPP provides for an initial period of up to 2 years for all TPP countries to complete their respective domestic processes necessary to ratify, and to make the economic opportunities of TPP a reality for the people of New Zealand, we must progress our domestic ratification process, allowing New Zealand to bring TPP into force along with our trading partners. Mr. Speaker, TPP is our biggest and most valuable FTA to date and places us centrally in the world's fastest growing region. It will deliver immense opportunity for New Zealand businesses. It will level the playing field for our exporters, who this government backs to succeed and to grow. And it gives me pleasure and pride to commend this bill to the House.
Members, the question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr. Speaker.
Reverend